Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Boston Globe Summit, the Boston Globe's annual conference. Thank you for joining us both in person here in Boston and virtually for an exciting series of discussions taking the Boston Globe's award-winning journalism beyond the page. My name is Anna Kuchment. I'm the Boston Globe's health editor. I'll be moderating today's presentation of Igniting Change, David Hogg on Youth Leading the Way. I'm pleased to be joined today for this session by David Hogg. Thank you so much, David, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to start by asking you're most closely associated with March for Our Lives, which you co-founded, but recently you started a new PAC called Leaders We Deserve, and your aim is to elect more young people to office. So what led you to start that PAC?
Yeah, well, what led me to start the PAC was that March for Our Lives had hired Maxwell Frost to be our first national organizing director before he became a member of Congress. And
he's the youngest ever member of Congress?
Well, I don't know if he's the youngest ever, actually, but he's the first Gen Z member of Congress.
Perfect.
And, I worked with Maxwell for a couple of years. One of the first actions that he did was actually with us in the Virginia State Capitol, where we had won a gun safety majority in the House, Senate, and won the governor's mansion as well. And it was our first chance to pass gun laws there in over a decade, basically. And many of our students were working there, organizing, many high school students and others. And unfortunately, a lot of them started getting death threats from people that were extremist gun rights supporters, saying that they were going to kill our students for lobbying, for organizing, things like that. And understandably, a lot of our students were very concerned. Their parents especially were very concerned because many, but not all of these people, but many of them were associated with neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups as well. And obviously, our first instinct was we just can't do it, right? Because we need to worry about the safety of our students and others. But actually, when I got this call and I was talking to Maxwell about it, because I was taking a break at the time for my own mental health, because I had been working nonstop for 2 years at that point. Maxwell said, what should we do here? And I suggested that we work with a Virginia State rep that we met who had actually lost his girlfriend to gun violence. She was shot and killed on live TV. And I suggested, instead of us just not going, what if we had students, college students from around Virginia, around DC, come in, show up the night before and spend the night on that guy's floor, his office floor, and get up and lobby the next morning and get out of there before the Alex Joneses and others of the world showed up by the thousands, open carrying AR-15s and other semi-automatic rifles. And despite them saying that it was a bit of a crazy idea, that's actually what ended up happening. They did show up. There were several dozen students and spent the night on that floor. And Maxwell got up with them and they went out that morning, lobbied, and they were part of the coalition. Certainly not the only group, but part of the coalition that helped pass the first gun laws there in decades. That was my first introduction to Maxwell. And then a year or two later or so, Maxwell told me, he's like, there's a seat opening up where I'm from in Orlando. Val Demings is running for Senate. I'm interested in running for Congress. And my first question to him was, I said, you're 24, right? The Constitution says you have to be 25. He's like, I know. I'll be old enough by that time. I was like, cool, I just want to make sure. And I said, Maxwell, I don't support many politicians. I don't really support any politician because I don't trust politicians, but I don't see you as a politician. I see you as a friend. I see you as an organizer and somebody that's been committed to this issue for a decade now. He started when he was 15 years old after the Sandy Hook shooting, and he saved up money from his job and from his parents, and for Christmas went up to the first national vigil for gun violence. So he's been in this for a decade. And I said, I'm going to support you and do everything I can. So I started working from my dorm room. I was on his kitchen cabinet calls every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. in my dining hall with my mask on and everything because it was COVID. And I said, all right, here, I gave his campaign manager the keys to my Twitter. I said, DM whoever you want, talk to whoever you want, just do whatever you need to do. And I helped get him some of his first media hits and everything. And I ended up raising him $380,000 in his first 2 quarters by asking people around the country, online and others, through email and SMS to support his campaign. Seeing that early support helped get him far in the lead, despite the fact that there were 2 former members of Congress running against him. and a very well-connected state legislator along with 7 other people. Because of that early money, in large part, I think Maxwell and his political experience, he ended up winning. And he became not only the first Gen Z member of Congress, but the first Afro-Cuban person in Congress and the first member of March for Our Lives in Congress as well. So sorry for that long story. But after that, I talked to Kevin Latta, Maxwell's campaign manager, and I said, I'm going to be graduating here after this semester. And I think it would be really great if we could take this model with Maxwell and bring it to the state level, where the worst policies are coming from in our country, whether it's don't say gay bills, whether it's permitless carry, whether it's stand your ground laws or abortion bans or other attacks on people. And those races are actually a lot cheaper to help fund as well. I hate talking about that because I wish that there wasn't any money involved in politics, but that's the reality of the game that we're in right now. And we said, great. So we decided to start working on Leaders We Deserve, and we launched it just a couple weeks ago, and we've had massive support. We have over 60,000 donors, grassroots donors from around the country that have come in and supported us in a really substantial way that enable us to fund more young candidates like Maxwell at the state level and some in Congress.
That's great. And so you're focused at the national level on candidates 35 and younger, and at the state level 30 and younger.
Yeah,
right?
And the vast majority of our focus is on the state level, predominantly in lean red to purple states, states like Texas, states like Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, probably some more purple ones as well. But really the idea behind Leaders We Deserve is to be an investment in the future. I think young people have the most valuable asset that anybody can have in politics on their side, which is time, which is something that not even the Koch brothers can buy more of. And I see it a little bit this is a strange metaphor, but it's the best one I've thought of. I kind of see it like investing in change, the way that you would invest for retirement. I see this as, instead of having a charismatic Obama-like figure that we're all very inspired by and think is amazing, because he is, obviously, but the reality is there is no single person that's going to save us, right? The idea behind Leaders We Deserve is basically playing the S&P 500 of creating change with these candidates by investing them at different levels of government and playing the long game here, knowing that I know we're not going to flip the Texas state legislature right now, obviously. But the idea is, if we elect these young people now, maybe we can give our generation some more of the faith that they need to have in democracy. Because the reason young people have been voting, I would imagine almost any young person in the audience, if you're not in class right now or skipping, could tell you, the reason we've been voting at such high numbers is not because we're incredibly hopeful about democracy. It's not because we have some great civic obligation and love of voting. It's because we are terrified. We're terrified of the direction our country is going in. We're terrified of the direction our planet is going in, the threats that our schools face, the threats that our communities face, whether that be directly through gun violence or in different forms through violence through policy, like don't say gay laws and others. And I see with Leaders We Deserve the chance to bring our generation and these movements to the inside of politics and give our generation the hope that we need by seeing ourselves reflected in office, by electing more people that not only reflect our generation, but reflect our values in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of those values, what goes into, how do you choose the candidates who you're going to endorse?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's the age parameter. It's 30 and under for state legislatures and 35 and under for Congress. And part of the reason we're focused on that narrow age range is because we actually look to President Biden as an inspiration for why it matters to start so young. It can be hard to believe this, but President Biden started when he was 29 years old in the Senate. The reason why he's been able to actually pass so much policy, and in my opinion, he's probably the most successful president of my lifetime so far, is because he has all of that experience in the Senate. He knows everyone. He knows who to talk to. He knows who the power players are, and he knows how to get things done. I don't think that would be possible if he had not started at that young age in the first place. And that's what I kind of see with these candidates. The other things that we look for are progressive candidates that support the issues our generation cares about, whether it's fighting against the climate change, whether it's fighting gun violence, whether it's fighting the people that seek to restrict bodily autonomy, whether it's fighting the rampant homophobia that has taken over many of our state legislators, or it's fighting for democracy in the first place. And the fact that states like Florida, have this idea that we hear all the time that they're a lost cause, that they're a super red state. But the reality is, in Florida, we pass progressive ballot measures pretty frequently, and not just by 50%, by 60% or more. We passed a $15 minimum wage. We passed restoring voting rights for people that had been previously convicted on nonviolent charges for over 1 million people. But what happens is every time after those ballot measures get passed, the state legislature says, you know what, we don't care. It doesn't matter, and we're just going to invalidate that in the first place. And then the state Supreme Court that is appointed by that governor and everything like that then also says the same thing. The challenge that we face is around gerrymandering more than anything in states like Florida or states like North Carolina. It's not that the states are not progressive, it's that in 2010 there was a massive backlash that year to President Obama being elected, where we lost I think it was over 900 state legislative seats, and Republicans gerrymandered their way into power. And it's created a system where politicians are picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians in the first place. Because the fact that a state like Florida votes so massively for a $15 minimum wage should be reflected, and in a democratic society, a well-functioning democratic society, it would be reflected in our representation, but it's not because of how they draw in those districts. So that's part of how we go about selecting our candidates, is looking for those values, and also looking, frankly, for young people that look like our generation and not just like younger versions of the white men that are on Capitol Hill right now. And I know it's ironic of me to say that, but there's a reason why I'm not running. It's to help support people that actually look like our generation, people like Maxwell and others, and make sure that if we are successful, no young person in the future will look at their government and not feel represented in any way.
Now I want to go back to March for Our Lives for a minute, and I just wanted to ask, where does March for Our Lives go from here? What is next for that movement?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked, because we actually just had something that I had been working on over the past 4 years. It sounds like it's in the works. I can't confirm or deny it because it got leaked by someone that was not me. But supposedly, the president is creating an Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which is something that March for Our Lives has been calling for the past 4 years. In 2019, March for Our Lives put together the most ambitious gun control plan in American history, called the Peace Plan. And we used that to basically push the president. It's nice being able to talk about this now that the candidates aren't running, because I can give you kind of the inside, I can take you behind the curtain of what our thought process was there. The idea was basically to move the Overton window by calling for the most radical policy that we could. And knowing that there were so many people running in the Democratic primary, we would assume that one of them would adopt that policy and endorse it to push the other candidates to be even better on the issue. That person that adopted that policy was Beto O'Rourke. And because he did that, it helped to push all the other candidates to be much better on our issue of gun violence prevention. One of the things in that policy was creating an Office of Gun Violence Prevention and a Director of Gun Violence Prevention, which it sounds like the White House is going to create very soon. And it's very nice because I've been working on that. I literally had so many Zoom calls in my dorm room about that very topic with the White House, with different leaders. We've even protested in front of the White House demanding this for years, and it is finally happening. And it wouldn't be happening without the young people that March for Our Lives helped turn out in 2020, in 2018, and in 2022, because we aren't just voting at the highest rates in American history. There's this idea out there that young people just don't vote, and I would say in general that is true, unfortunately, because you just look at the statistics and you can see that compared to a lot of older people, young people do not vote as much. There's a lot of factors that go into that I could talk about all day. We could have an entire panel on that. But the important thing is our generation, Gen Z, and current Americans that are 18 to 29 years old, have been voting at the highest rates in American history for their age group ever. And not just 50-50. In 2000, 18 to 29-year-olds voted 50-50 for Bush and Gore, effectively canceling out their vote. So we could have had 100% youth voter turnout then, and it basically wouldn't have mattered. What's important is that in 22, young people not only had one of the highest rates of voter turnout in American history in a non-presidential midterm, they also voted very clearly in one direction for candidates who support gun safety, to the point that they helped decide a lot of these elections by they voted plus 20 points in your average congressional election, from the best of my recollection of those statistics, for those candidates that support gun safety in the first place. As for the future, though, and not just celebrating the wins that we're now having, it's continuing to turn out young people in our generation and building it as a habit, and making sure that voting is as easy as possible and getting registered to vote is as easy, if not automatic, as possible. One example of how we've done this is in California. We worked on a bill that eventually became law. I think it was called the California Youth Civic Engagement and Voter Empowerment Act, which essentially made it so that if you were a state school, the state had, and there's an election, and you have above a certain number of students, you have to have people that are basically on campus to help turn out young people to vote and inform them that there is an election coming and that there are polling places. So it's great that there are all these organizations out there registering young people to vote, but that's a temporary solution. We need to actually address the fact of why young people are not registered to vote in the first place, and we need to build state-centered solutions around that so it's not reliant on the nonprofit industrial complex to be part of that, because we can't have the boom and bust cycle influencing it. Going forward, we're working to help elect more candidates that support gun safety, obviously, and doing a lot of work at the state level to help pass gun safety laws. Even if we can't get them through Congress, we can get them done at the state level. And on top of that, March for Our Lives, in comparison to a lot of the general movement, historically speaking, we don't just focus on how somebody gets a gun, contrary to what the media might tell you a lot of the time. We focus on how and why somebody picks up a gun in the first place. We do this through addressing a lot of the three evils that Dr. King talked about in his three evils of society, of militarism, racism, and poverty. One of the things we talked about is armed white supremacy, and the fact that people like the shooter at my high school can make multiple threats against different communities, talking about how much they hate black and brown people, immigrants, so on and so forth, and they are still able to go out and get a firearm. How people that are convicted of even a misdemeanor hate crime are still able to go out and legally purchase firearms. That's crazy. That should not be the case. So we talk about not only how does somebody get a gun, but also the systemic reasons of why. Even though we started from obviously a horrific school shooting, we know that most gun violence occurs outside of school. And the vast majority of gun deaths in this country are actually gun suicides that are deaths of despair that also have to be addressed, that don't get talked about. So we try to take a holistic solution and talk about, okay, why does this young person feel the need to pick up a gun in the first place? And what programs can we build around them to give them the hope, the jobs, whatever they need, whatever resources they need to not pick up a gun in the first place? Because the reason why Parkland doesn't have shootings on a daily basis is not necessarily because we have stronger gun laws than the rest of Florida. We don't. It's because we have a median household income of over $100,000 a year. Opportunity and eradicating poverty would be the single best thing that we could do to prevent gun violence in this country.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to ask you a couple of last questions. So you yourself witnessed and were victim of one of the worst mass shootings, school shootings in American history, and you've since then been working seemingly nonstop on this issue. You know, what impact has that had on your own mental health, and what do you do to kind of sustain yourself through your work?
Well, I think in some ways it's been a positive impact on my mental health because it's given me an avenue to advocate and not just feel like we're powerless, that we can't do anything. I think that's one of the most powerful things about what March for Our Lives does. Just the other day, I was at, our chapter unfortunately went through a school shooting at UNC Chapel Hill, where there was a professor that was killed there. And our chapter was organizing afterwards and asked me to come down and rally with them and to be in community with a lot of those survivors, and for them to know that they're not alone, that they can do something. I think is really empowering and gives me a certain sense of hope, because I know that I'm not alone in this fight. I think it can be easy for young people that are in this fight to think that it's all on them, or in any movement for social justice to think it's all on them, but it's not. We're a collective movement of many thousands of individuals. And what's helped me continue is knowing that I can take a break because there are other people out there doing the work when I can't, and letting those people know that they can take a break because I'm doing the work when they can't as well. And just as an example, when we were at UNC, a couple weeks later, I came back and we were rallying at the state capitol. We went in there, and this literally happened like 2 weeks ago. We went in there with our chapter and the students that wanted to demand stronger gun laws. And when they went into the state legislature, when they were in session, we were in the speaker's gallery above where they were talking about their budget process or something. And it's traditional for the House Speaker, who in this case is a Republican that's taken more money from the NRA, or as much money from the NRA as is possible, essentially, to turn around and thank the students or whoever's in the gallery for being there. So as he turned around and thanked the students for being there, about 50 students from UNC, and along with faith leaders as well, locked arms together and started chanting, "Vote them out," until we got kicked out of the state legislature, to set a precedent that young people are not going to take this in the first place. and to let them know that they're not just going to get away with continuously weakening gun laws over and over again. There is going to be a political price to pay, and we are going to show up and defeat them once again in these elections. Even if these districts are drawn against us, we still have the most valuable asset on our side, which is the fact that pretty much every one of those old, predominantly men, that was clapping for us, we are going to outlive. Thank God.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have left for today, but it has been such a pleasure for me moderating this session on Igniting Change with David Hogg, and I want to thank you all for taking part in the Boston Globe Summit 2023. There's still some great sessions up ahead under this year's theme of today's innovators, tomorrow's leaders. So be sure to keep watching and check out the full schedule at globe.com/summit. A quick reminder that all summit sessions are being recorded and will be made available for viewing after the event. Thank you for being part of our community, and enjoy the rest of the event.
And if you'd like to support March for Our Lives, you can go to marchforourlives.com or leaderswedeserve.com if you're interested in that. Either one of those, we do great work. So thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David.